Hello, everyone, and welcome to WBUR's 7th virtual town hall. We hope you all had a very nice holiday weekend full of responsible social distancing and not sharing any ice cream sundaes with anyone other than the people you already live with who are healthy.
And we hope
Amory?
that you are healthy too, we should say.
Yes. If you hear screaming in the background right now, that's one of my 3-year-olds. So, just to try to enjoy that as much as possible.
They are happy children. We're here, of course, to talk about misinformation and conspiracy theories that are circulating around online related to coronavirus and COVID-19. And today we're hoping to learn a little bit about where these come from, how they spread, and what we can all do to help prevent them from circulating further.
Of course, we're not going to do that, right? Because I'm Ben Brock Johnson, that's Amory Sivertson. We are but humble podcast hosts here at WBUR. We make the show Endless Thread, featuring the best stories that you can find on Reddit, where there's like no conspiracy theories whatsoever or misinformation whatsoever, right?
No, but we're here on Skype with two very distinguished guests, Joan Donovan and Rene Najera. Dr. Joan Donovan is the research director of Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. She looks closely at online extremism, media manipulation, and disinformation campaigns.
And Dr. Rene Najera is an epidemiologist and the editor of the History of Vaccines, an online project of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia. He was also a primary guide to our podcast series on the history of vaccines and anti-vaxxers from last year called Infectious, which we are happy to say just won a regional Murrow Award for Best New Series. Joan was also featured in that series, so we're calling them up and begging that they do us some favors by helping us all get smarter today. Joan, Rene, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And a quick programming note, we know, of course, you're already subscribed to Endless Thread podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, but we also want to remind you to subscribe to the WBUR YouTube channel, which might be how you're watching this right now. It's a good way to get notified anytime that we release a new video, and you can also click the bell icon right next to the subscribe button if you want to be notified whenever we go live.
Also, we are taking questions at slido.com today. Some of you have already submitted questions. We hope you'll consider submitting more. The event code is WBUR-VTH7. That's WBUR-VTH7. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible today. Also, check out the YouTube live chat to talk to others who are watching and exchange ideas, but only true ideas. No fake conspiracy theories.
You're trying to make the internet boring. Let them have some fun in the YouTube chat. Yeah, don't tell them how to live their lives. Come on.
Fair enough. Do whatever you will. Do whatever you will. And I do want to start by checking in a little bit. Joan, how are you? How is the quarantine treating you? How is life? What's going on in your world?
I mean, it's weird. We left the office, I think, mid-March, and now I'm starting to realize that it's almost June, and yeah, it's been really hard to adjust. I feel like that Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day, every day it comes up, happens again. The constraints are the same, the people I interact with are the same, so I got to make it fun. By some order of wacky hijinks. So just trying to keep it light, but yeah, I mean, it is quite a strange feeling to still be, with stay-at-home orders for this long. But as Rene, I'm sure, will tell us, it's going to be quite a while longer before we get to where we're going. And so, but I'm hanging in there.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah. Rene, I know that you have been really busy during this time because as we were getting in touch with you for this event and scheduling around it, you're doing work on the front lines and we were trying to work around some of that. And we have a photo of you here to show people. Can people see that photo yet? Ah, there we go.
Yeah, Yeah.
Mhm.
There's me.
So,
If I
Rene,
look
tell us.
tired, if I look tired, it's because
Yeah,
I'm exhausted. Yeah, no. So
what you've been up to.
I do the history of vaccines, editing and updating and everything on the side. That's kind of my side gig. My main work is at a local county health department. And so I've been working on analyzing the data, of course, as an epidemiologist, but also going out into the field. And so this is a picture of me all ready to go into a facility that at the time was having a COVID-19 outbreak. And so, N95 masks, full gear, to go in there. And this is, I think, this particular week I had gone about 75 hours working nonstop. Weekends are not a thing for me anymore. I get to see my family in the evenings if I'm not doing something. But it's my life's work, and so here I am, not only fighting the virus in person, but also the disinformation, which I think is probably just as dangerous, or it certainly doesn't do us any favors. And so I saw it with vaccines and the anti-vaxxers, and now I'm seeing it with COVID-19 and the people who don't believe that COVID-19 is a thing. I would encourage them to come join me at one of these epidemics. If they don't wear a mask, they'll see it better. But it is a thing, and it is happening, and that's the work that I'm doing pretty much 24/7 since this whole thing began.
Wow. Yeah, so I think we want to start. We're going to do basically three things tonight, hopefully. We're going to talk about the origins of misinformation about coronavirus and other things online. We're going to talk a little bit about how this misinformation spreads. And then hopefully we're going to give you some tips on what you can do to help prevent misinformation from spreading. And I think we want to start by just talking about where some of this misinformation is coming from. And I want to start with you, Rene, by just asking a little bit about why, as an epidemiologist, misinformation in a global pandemic can be tricky, and sort of like how it comes about. So I don't know. That's a big question, but
it's not a loaded question at all. So we humans, I know, right? We humans, we like to be in control. We like to think that we're in control of our environment and everything around it, and we really are not. A lot of things happen just by chance because that's the way the world works. That's the way the universe works. And so what happened here is that we have a virus that for some reason jumped from a bat to an intermediary species to humans and has caused all this disease and death. And we want to control that. And to control it, we control the narrative. And so we say things like, oh, it came out of a biolab. And so if it came out of a biolab, then surely somebody's guilty. Then surely somebody can be held accountable. Then surely we can do something about it, like in the movies, right? But if it just happened by happenstance, we feel out of control. And so that's the beginning of these things, of these little bits of misinformation, is to try to have some sort of control, to try to feel like you're in control. And if you're in control of the narrative, if your biases are being confirmed, then you have a little bit more control. And that's where it gets the ball rolling. And you see it with not just this, but with technology has always been. There's always been pushback against technology by somebody trying to control the narrative and saying, no. I know what's really going on. I'm woke. I am not sheep, and I am going to try to teach you to see it the way that it really is. When in fact, it's just everything's full of randomness.
Mm. Joan, you focus on misinformation online in particular. Can you talk a little bit about how misinformation gets started in online communities?
Yeah. We track these things according to what we call a life cycle model. So we look at where campaigns being planned, more often, way more often than not, probably 1,000 to 1 shot is that your new conspiracy theory or what have you is going to land and actually resonate with people and get shared. What usually happens, though, is along the life cycle, someone much more important than you picks it up. So a politician, a journalist, a celebrity, any one of, online influencers might dangerously speculate that this could be true, right? Because the other thing that's interesting about this world is that everyone now is attuned to terms of service, and they're very attuned to what you can say on which platform and how much you can get away with. And so when communities are thinking about, or possibly true believers, right, that is, that they don't think it's a conspiracy theory at all, they think it's the truth and they're spreading it, these things can percolate in different communities, small groups, where you get a lot of affirmation that says, yeah, I see it this way, or I think you're right, or people start to pool evidence. We see this a lot on Reddit, right, where people create these places where they start to pool and self-investigate. And you'd be surprised the kinds of things that count as evidence for people. Like, when people are looking up coronavirus, they freak out to find out that coronavirus has been around a while and that it's a category of disease, and that some people think COVID-19 means the 19th time we went through this, but no, it's for the year, right? It was found in 2019, right? And so there's ways in which evidence, based on your own kind of worldview, becomes conforming to the conspiracy theory. And then what we really try to look at is when it breaks out of those fringe communities, when it moves into other places where people who hadn't been talking about those issues are now suddenly inundated with thinking about, for instance, the controversies around 5G. People start to think, well, I wasn't paying attention to 5G before. And then when you start Googling for things and looking around, you see that it's kind of everywhere. You see that there's mountains of things to go through. And some of it is true, and most of it is false. But knowing the difference is something that even the WHO has said is a problem right now, as we're going through an infodemic, where the difference between what is true and what is false is really hard to figure out, which actually might lead you back into one of these conspiracy-minded groups or communities, because if you're allowed to engage and ask questions, like on a Reddit board, for instance, you might be convinced of some things eventually. Reddit does a remarkable job, I should say, in cleaning up some of this stuff and doesn't really let a lot of it linger compared to other places online where, for instance, YouTube is often far too late to do any moderation. And so, but I guess long story short is that it can kind of happen to anyone where they get caught up in one of these situations where they're accidentally sharing misinformation. But by and large, it has a lot to do with our information seeking habits and then how we get engaged on the topic.
It's interesting, Amory and I recently did an episode on basically about the coronavirus subreddit, and how that subreddit is run by, a group of essentially scientists. That the mods of that subreddit are epidemiologists, data scientists, people who study this stuff. And it's also interesting to see online communities be sort of self-regulate and self-moderate in good ways. And I assume that happens too, right, Joan?
Yeah, I mean, it can take all kind, like communities can be full of all different kinds of people, but we're really talking about conversion, right? So the amount of people that are there versus the amount of people that are bought into whatever's happening. Because you could have a group ostensibly, there's a recent study out about this where people who are anti-vaccine have a strategy, and they spread out across a bunch of groups where people might have a conversation about vaccines, like new mom groups, for instance, on Facebook, and they insinuate themselves in the conversation, and then they slowly over time adjust you to their worldview. And they've been able to use communities where people are uncertain as a place to do conversion. And this is very similar to the kinds of things we were tracking in 2016 around white nationalists really trying to get their issues on the political agenda, in the ways in which they were manipulating journalists and other groups by not showing you fully who they are, but slowly attuning you to their worldview and their positions.
Rene, we talked to you last year for our infectious series, and both of you really talking about combating misinformation around, at that time we were really talking about the measles and the measles vaccine. This feels pretty different in some ways, in the sense that we know a lot less about COVID-19. We know more now, certainly, than we did a couple of months ago, but we know a lot less in general about COVID-19 than we do about the measles. And scientists and doctors have been learning more along the way, mid-pandemic, and adjusting their recommendations mid-pandemic accordingly. So how do you convince the skeptics and the people who might be spreading misinformation that doctor knows best, when the doctors in this case are figuring a lot out in real time?
So I begin those discussions by saying, look, this is what we do know. And so we know that hand washing prevents infections, not just from this virus, but from all viruses. We know that staying away prevents infection, staying away more than 6 feet from people. We know that in a pandemic situation, you stay home until the virus runs its course, and it stays. So we know those things from biology, from history, from what happened in 1918 and other pandemics that have happened since. So we know those things, and that's where I begin that discussion of going, well, look, let's think about this for a second. I had a friend who fixes radios and televisions for a living, and I said, okay, let's think about this for a second. 5G. What is it? And he tells me all about the electromagnetic spectrum. I said, okay, well, how could that interfere with a biological system at the wavelength that it operates? And so he kind of like, oh yeah, it doesn't. I said, exactly, it doesn't. So why would it cause a viral epidemic? Beginning with those kind of discussions of engaging the person on what they already know, and then building from that, instead of just slamming them with a whole bunch of information that they, number one, they're not going to take all of it in at the same time, and number two, you're talking down to them. And so it's a little bit harder to do with somebody who doesn't have a very good education, and certainly I encounter some of those people as well in some of the disadvantaged communities that they barely finished grade school, so they're not going to know about the electromagnetic spectrum, they're not going to know about biology. And so then I start with, what did your mother tell you to do before eating? Wash my hands. Why? Because it gets rid of the germs and keeps me healthy. Okay, so then let's start from there. Let's start from washing your hands. And now let's go to the next step. When I speak, how far can you feel my breath? How far can I, if I sneeze, how far will it go? Oh, about 2 meters, 6 feet. Okay, then that's why we tell you to stay away 6 feet. And so having those kinds of discussions, and it's hard because sometimes online you don't have that knowledge previous of where the people are starting from. And so it's when somebody comes in just hitting you with nonsense after nonsense after nonsense, and you don't know them, and they're not there for you to read them as human beings, and you kind of don't know where to begin. And that's, I think, where we get into trouble with online information.
One of the things that was really interesting to us following some of this was to find that a lot of the reporting that we did on anti-vax groups about a year ago now was feeling relevant again, as the anti-quarantine protests started popping up around the country. And so we have this New York Times graphic to share with you guys. It seems like a vaccine for COVID-19 is probably a ways away. So Joan, why are anti-vaccine groups getting involved in anti-quarantine protests?
Oh my goodness. So we're going to go down the rabbit hole here, but health is political. Surprise. And so one of the major issues right now is debates about what the future holds, right? And everybody's participating in those kinds of debates. Right now, though, is a particular kind of political opportunity for the anti-vaccine movement where they can really drive a wedge along several issues, and using protests is an important aspect of this because it demonstrates that they do not fear the virus, that they do not believe that wearing a mask or social distancing is going to matter. So in a lot of ways, the protest being physical is a manifestation of their truest belief, which is that a vaccine would never help anyone dealing with COVID-19 because they don't believe it is caused by a virus in some cases. In other cases, they believe that it has the statistics have been completely exaggerated to the point where it's, and this is not my point of view, this is their point of view, but that it's a political thing where the Democrats have exaggerated the statistics in order to bring down Trump. And you'll see a big crossover with these reopen protests between anti-vaxxers and pro-Trump people. And then the other piece of the puzzle that you're going to see when you look at these reopen protests are 2A advocates, so Second Amendment advocates. So these are all people who are in probably an uneasy coalition with one another. They don't necessarily all agree on the endpoints, but because they're standing in unification around reopening, each one of their issues is going to come up in a different way. The other thing I'll say about the vaccination movements is how imperative it's been for them to be able to spread out across social media. They use all kinds of manipulative techniques to stay available, to stay viable, changing words so that they avoid content moderation, re-upping, doing numerous different accounts so that their content stays live, knowing when they're breaking terms of service. And then the other thing they do, which is what you showed there, is they stage photo ops, and they use those photo ops as ways to continuously show their dedication to the cause. But by and large, it's a debate about the anti-vaccine debate right now about COVID-19 is about a vaccine that doesn't exist. We don't know what the risks are. We don't know if it's going to be made mandatory or not, because we don't know if we're going to get one that's that effective. I'm hopeful that we will. But the debate about that is very much in the future. And we're going to see that group become more and more aggressive and prominent as we get closer to potential vaccine. And that's where people like Rene's work are really going to have to think about their communication strategies online, because truth needs an advocate right now. And unless we launch the biggest pro-vaccine movement in the history of the world to counterbalance this misinformation, then we certainly are going to have a hard time fighting against the kind of rhetoric that's going to spew out of these groups.
Just staying with the sort of anti-vaccine stuff for another minute before we move on. When we were talking with you last year for our series, Rene, you had a pretty interesting breakdown of the different kinds of anti-vaxxers out there, and I think we're already talking around this a little bit. And I'd love for us to listen back to a description from you. And I should say, before we play that, in the tape we're about to hear, Rene references the name Wakefield, and that's as in Andrew Wakefield. Rene, can you give us the 10, 15, 30-second description of who Andrew Wakefield is?
Andrew Wakefield is a physician from London, from England, who decided one day that he was going to get some kids at a party and take their blood, and those children are autistic, and decided that he was going to manipulate the data a little bit and manipulate some of the findings and try to say that even though his paper says that there is no link between the MMR vaccine and autism, in his gut, he felt that it was. And he became an anti-vaccine hero, an anti-vaccine activist. And his research has since been debunked, and it was found to be fraudulent. And the paper that he published, even though the paper itself, if you go and read it, it says that there's no link, that there should be more studies, it still got retracted because it was full of inconsistencies and the research was not sound.
Fair. Okay, well, let's take a listen to Rene's description of the different kinds of anti-vaxxer people that are out there.
The first one are the people who don't know better and they're reasonably afraid of a vaccine adverse reaction.
So in questioning those risks, which one is best for me and my child?
The second kind of anti-vaxxer is a little bit more complex. It's the one who should know better. So these are your Wakefields of the world who have a medical degree or a science degree.
You have an obligation to explain to your patient the benefits and the risks of the treatment and the option to opt out.
And they totally misinterpret or misunderstand the information that they're reading or they're absorbing. And then you have the showmen, you have the people that are making money off of this, who may or may not know that they're in the wrong. They may or may not know that they're lying, but they do a lot of lying, and they're doing so for monetary gain.
Hey everybody, Del Bigtree here with the High Wire. Well, the newspaper's going crazy.
They're the ones that have the websites that sell you the natural supplements to detox you from vaccines. They're the ones that sell the bleach enemas for autistic children to try to cure them from being autistic. And of course, they're not mutually exclusive. You know, you may have overlap of all three at some point, but they're out there.
So Rene, that was a year ago when it seemed like our worst problem was the measles outbreak of the time. And we just live in a totally different world now. But does your description there hold up? And are all of those different kinds of anti-vaxxers playing a role in today's misinformation about coronavirus?
Yeah, I think that they are. I think that you have people who don't know better. And again, like I said, some people just have never thought of what a virus is or what an infectious disease is or how to stop it. And so they're going with what they're listening to on the radio, what they're seeing on their WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, etc. And then you have the people who do know better and should know better, and they're out there, and you see them at some of these protests. You see some people who are healthcare providers, healthcare workers, and they're out there protesting. And then you have the people that are trying to make a buck. I see every day an advertisement for something that is going to protect me from coronavirus or something that is going to boost my immunity or heal me, that has not been proven to work. And so you have, again, like I said at the end there, they're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes you do have a conflagration of all these three types of people, either in one person or in one group, or in one person or in one institution even, such as, unfortunately right now, in Washington, D.C.
So Joan, you also talked to us for our series, of course, and I want to play one other clip from you because I think it's relevant here. And this is about how some of these groups get organized online, specifically on Facebook, I think we were talking about. And so if we'd like, or if we can, I'd like for us to hear a little piece of Joan talking about these Facebook groups.
So we've been talking about the anti-vax movement as really the only example, or one of the only examples, of a situation in which new moms are being radicalized online.
Well, when we think about radicalization, we tend to think of something probably much more pointedly political that has, and in this case does have, life and death consequences.
Yeah.
And it's troublesome that a word like that might fit here. So does it stand scientifically that vaccines cause autism? No. But does that fear cause people to act in different ways? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you're making your decisions about what your child is going to eat or drink or ingest or breathe, those are really weighty decisions, and parents do need to do a fair amount of research.
Yep.
But that's why we have doctors. This is where the problem is that we have a belief in the internet as a countervailing network of knowledge, and it's just not true. There is good knowledge on the internet. It is very hard to find.
So Joan, you've been talking about this a little bit as well, I feel like, but why is good knowledge so hard to find on the internet?
Well, as you know, investigations are expensive. It's expensive to run an experiment. It's expensive to create knowledge. Like, that's why college costs so much. You know, an education is something that our society has put a pretty high price tag on. But at the same time, we often think about the internet as having so much potential for helping us share and spread knowledge. And some of the early architects of the internet were librarians themselves. But we have to think differently about social media platforms, because social networking, which is the thing that they've monetized, right, is your relationships with other people and what kind of insights they can glean from that, is how Facebook makes money. And so the more hot button, divisive, controversial the content is that you're viewing, the more likely you are to continue to engage. That's why with reporters, it's really difficult to get them to drop the lead, which is usually the disinformation, and do what's called the truth sandwich and say, all right, I'm going to state what's true at top. I'm going to state the misinformation in the middle, which is burying the lead. And then I'm going to state the truth again, right?
Ooh,
because
truth sandwich. I love that. Truth sandwich.
Yeah, but it's a hard thing to do. There's a great article by Jane C. Hugh out there called "No, You Did Not Get Coronavirus in the Fall of 2019." And I thought that was a really smart headline to be able to bring in this idea that California had somehow magically developed herd immunity while the rest of us who were not in California didn't. But yeah, it's important to think about like how social media companies, their primary objective isn't going to be to shut this down, because it does drive their monetization strategy. And so at the same time, we have to think again about where our defenses lie. And I think our defenses lie in strong journalism that is very well supported by resources.
If you're
this
just
is where you can put in a plug to your Patreon or whatever.
You know,
but I'm serious. Like, people should pay for journalism. It's really expensive to do what you all do, and what we get if you don't is it's really easy to just churn up any old information and make a snappy headline.
Very true, and we will circle back to that at the very end. But in the meantime, I just want to let people know that if you're just joining us, we are live. This is a WBUR virtual town hall. We're joined by Dr. Joan Donovan. She's the research director of Harvard Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. Also with us is Dr. Rene Najera. He's an epidemiologist. And we want to hear from you. You can submit questions if you have them right now at slido.com, SLIDO.com. And the event code that you want to enter is WBUR, V as in Victor, TH7, WBUR VTH7 at slido.com to submit questions that you have for Joan and Rene.
Yeah, and so I'd like to ask one of those questions now, and it is about plandemic, which I'm sure Joan and Rene both have some thinking about and some experience with, probably pushing back against, or at least looking at how people are looking at this. So I guess the question is, what is plandemic? Can you just talk about how an idea or a piece of, what some would say is misinformation, like plandemic, how does it get popular, and how does it spread? And I think you were hinting at this a little bit before, Joan, with this idea of the fact that certain things aren't allowed on certain platforms is maybe part of the marketing of something like this.
Yeah, so the plandemic is a video. It was a 25-minute video with a interview with I'm not going to mention their name, but a discredited scientist, and it had very high production value. But it knew that the producers of the film knew that it was going to be taken down from YouTube immediately. So what they had done was they had created a website with a download link that invited everyone, like a choose your own adventure story, to download the piece of content and re-upload it to their own social media accounts. And then we started to see a bunch of people, getting hits and strikes and having their content, either removed or fact check was placed over it. And of course, YouTube did take down the video initially, which then drove interest in the video. And so as a media manipulation strategy, it wasn't unique. We've seen instances like this in the past, but they really could bank on the fact that YouTube was going to react, and reacting is the thing that churned up the media attention, churned up the public attention to it. And I'll just give you a little overview of what was in the video so that you don't have to watch it. But essentially, it made some false claims about the efficacy of masks. It made some false claims about the importance of or potential for a vaccine. And it was centered on this idea of like, this is the information, quote unquote, they don't want you to know. But if you were to Google this scientist, you would find very quickly that in her background, you know, for the last several years, she's lost jobs. She's been a proponent and a speaker in the anti-vax movement. And so people were getting manipulated, not just around the edges of the content and about like the medical misinformation. They were also being manipulated along the political spectrum to try to make this a polarizing wedge issue about platform companies and platform companies doing takedowns in this moment. And it did work because it did expose a lot more people to the idea. But then the countervailing force, of course, is that mainstream media did report on it as a kind of hoax or scam, which I think was an important part of this. But by and large, the pandemic, if you follow its traces and you try to understand it on the internet, the filmmakers did one other savvy thing that I'll mention, is they took a keyword that was already sort of peppered around a ton of different conspiracy groups and other online communities, and they crystallized it to mean their film. But pandemic has been sort of in the muck and the mire of all of these other places. And so they really co-opted something that was percolating as a meme or as an idea that people were sharing and gave it a form.
Yeah, it's like I told you earlier, if the pandemic is actually man-made and planned, then we can hold those people who did it accountable, and we'll be able to stop this from happening ever again. And no longer will we ever have pandemics because the people who do it will be scared of the people from doing it. And that's kind of the idea that they really went after here. Look, everything that's going on, it's all part of a bigger plan from, you know, pick your conspiracy theory. And so unfortunately, not enough people out there are skeptical enough to go and Google this person and see their history of bad research, retracted papers, and getting in trouble with the law, etc. And so, you know, you just kind of like need to be a little more skeptical when you're looking at these things, not just this one video, but also anything else that you gotta do your due diligence, be a little bit more skeptical and kind of do a little bit more research on it. You know, the anti-vaxxers love to say, do your own research and see how vaccines are bad. Well, yeah, do your own research and do it well, and maybe do it under the guidance of somebody who knows better. And you'll see that you know, you'll see what the evidence really says.
I'm wondering if we can do sort of a lightning round right now, just kind of like a where did this come from, if we can. And we'll show you some images, and maybe Rene and Joan can kind of switch off if you know where a particular image came from. So
is it gonna be like a Rorschach test?
Find out.
I'm game. Let's do it.
All right. Okay,
awesome.
Let's give it a try. Here's the first image.
Yeah. All right.
Oh. Yeah, I know this meme.
Yeah.
Okay. Please.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is one of those conspiracy theories that was up underneath the banner of pandemic for a while. People were really trying to jam the algorithmic signals around Bill Gates and Gates Foundation. And so you've seen a really huge influx of content about the Gates Foundation. And of course, here it's Center for Global Human Population Reduction, which is not any of Bill Gates's programs. You know, and in prior iterations of this kind of conspiracy theory where there's, you know, a billionaire controls the world kind of things, it's usually George Soros who's at the center of these, which we've seen quite a few versions of conspiracy theories about him as well. But this in particular, we've seen an uptick in media manipulation campaigns that really are trying to push this anti-Bill Gates narrative.
And you know, this came from a statement that Bill Gates said one time about how if a family in a developing nation has 7 children and 5 of them are going to die from vaccine preventable diseases, then having vaccines available will allow that family to only have 2 children, and so that brings down the population naturally. And so they took this and ran with it. I mean, it was. It is true that the more well-vaccinated a community or a population is, the lower the birth rate is going to be. But that's because they don't need 7 children so that 2 will survive. They'll need 2 children and the 2 will survive.
All right. Let's go to the next image, if we can. Okay.
Yeah, so the image says, it's a comment that says, it's time to act now. Any 5G tower in your area, burn it down. Collect people and stand and fight this. Act now before it's too late. So I have seen reports that have been substantiated that there have been attacks on 5G towers in the UK. And then we've also heard about harassment of telephone line workers in the US, where we're rolling out a new technology. It's an important new technology because it's going to make our connected world even faster, and then also be spread out in such a way that it should bring down the cost significantly of telecommunication. And so 5G is an important infrastructural project for the US and other nations. But in the conspiracy theory world, 5G represents a whole host of what we might call environmental factors that people are weaving into the story, generally to point to something besides a vaccine as being the logical next step.
And by the way, 5G means 5th generation. That doesn't mean 5 gigahertz. Gigahertz is GHz. And so that's another thing. It's like, 5 gigahertz is a very strong signal. No. This is 5G. Huh. You put a cup of water next to it, it wouldn't warm it up. The sun would warm it up even better than 5G ever could.
All right, so let's go to the next one here if we can. This is, I think, an interesting one because it's connected to the conversation about platforms.
This guy.
You know this guy?
Yeah. Go for it, Rene.
So no, I'm not going to say a lot. He's very litigious. He's somebody that, in my opinion, is a litigious bully. He likes to go to the courts to try to settle differences with other people. He sued Robert F. K. Jr., who is an anti-vaccine proponent himself, and they're fighting it out in court over he said kind of situation. But he doesn't have the epidemiological medical background. Yes, he has a PhD from MIT, and apparently you need to put MIT PhD behind your name. So mine would be superbly long from Johns Hopkins. But he, again, it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. You need to look at the background of this person. You need to look at what things they have said previously, what claims they have made. For example, he claims that he invented email. And when you look at the historical record, this is not the truth. And so he'll probably want to sue me over that statement. But in my opinion, it is not the truth. So so this guy, yeah.
All right, next one.
Oh, okay.
So this might be this might need some context, but you guys have at it and we'll see where we get.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of hubris online, which is probably only going to be settled in a decade about where the virus came from and how it was distributed. There's been a lot of what we call white propaganda campaigns on Twitter between the US government and China, each of them blaming the other for patient zero. But this is kind of a representation of a bunch of different maps that we've seen related to the relationship between the seafood market and how if you're working at the virology lab and then you had gone to buy seafood, maybe that's how it happened, or conversely came from the seafood market into the virology lab and then, you know, found its way outdoors through some of the missteps of scientists. But by and large, there's going to need to be a major investigation that really tries to unpack all of this when travel is again available. But I have faith in my investigative reporters that they will get to the bottom of this, especially our public health advocates as well.
Yeah, so I was looking through my my email account and looked up Wuhan to see when I first caught attention of this, and an article came up from 2017 that I emailed to myself to look at later, and that was talking about the H7N9 influenza outbreak that Wuhan had. So they had a number of cases of this novel influenza virus. And in the comment section, again, people were pointing to how close this institute is there. So apparently you cannot have a research institute where there's an outbreak of anything because it must have come from that research institute, not from anywhere else. I'm just down the road from the U.S. Army Medical Institute on Infectious Diseases. So I'm sure, you know, I'm one step away from something really bad happening, I guess.
All right, so let's go to the last. I think it's going to be the last of these slides here.
This guy.
Yes.
You're triggering me, man.
So
you know, push those buttons.
This is obviously Alex Jones. He looks like he might be in court there. And if you read the information below, I think you'll you know, the sort of, I think it's the top of the article. I think it's from the Houston Chronicle. Yeah, go ahead. Take it away, guys.
So we've seen all manner of different supplements and treatments. This has been an interesting way of understanding how platforms and content moderation is going to roll out related to health misinformation, because we have seen a very quick crackdown from platform companies related to products that can either treat COVID-19 or coronavirus or cleanse, disinfectant. And if what you don't know about Alex Jones is, well, I mean, it's good if you don't know anything, but if you don't know much about how he finances his podcast and his, you know, his web radio show and his videos and his whole operation is really through these supplements. And for many years, people have argued that the supplements sold on his show overpromise and underdeliver for various reasons. And so this was another iteration of that. But it was really interesting to see the FDA come out right off the bat and start trying to get platform companies to take down any kind of false cure. And the other thing I'll say about this that's important to understand is the night that the president first mentioned hydroxychloroquine, that moment, you know, and the night before too, when Fox News had mentioned it, we saw a spike in searches for chloroquine and other supplements and tonic water. And so people, when they see things like this, do instantly try to find out more. They try to find out, is this the new cure that I should start to hoard because of what happened with hand sanitizer and toilet paper and masks? And so these can be very effective product placements, unfortunately. And so we have to think very quickly about, we have to execute very quickly a strategy for content moderation around fake cures.
Quick thing, if you consume enough silver, you will actually turn super blue. Like your skin will actually turn blue. So if you want to look like a Smurf, go ahead.
Fair.
Noted.
So I think we've talked a little bit about how this stuff spreads, where it comes from. So let's talk about how folks work to stop it, and not just people in the government and people at health organizations, but regular users. And we've had a few questions on Slido about this specifically. One of them is from Katie. Her question is, an intelligent / deeply religious Christian friend believes the virus conspiracy theories. Any mention of the truth brings, quote, I'll pray for you. What can I do? And then I just want to mention another question from Slido, if I can find it here. Let's see, I'm just looking for it, scrolling through it here. How do I engage constructively with a conservative friend who believes that Bill Gates and the globalists cooked up the virus in a lab? So maybe that's a twofer for you guys, if you could respond to those two.
So I think from a religious point of view, you need to, again, if you're going to discuss this with somebody who's deeply religious, and you need to be well versed in their religion. I try to stay away from religions that I am not familiar with. But for somebody who is Christian, then you begin with the discussion of what is truth, what is the truth, who controls the narrative, who controls the truth. And so there are a lot of instances in the Bible where we are warned about having eyes and not seeing, having ears and not listening. And so we are also told about the instruction of the teacher, the rabbi, to the learner. And so, that we need to have that discussion of what is the truth? What is your truth? What do you see as the truth? Okay, well, who told you that? Was it a teacher that told you that, or was it somebody who is your equal? And well, why don't you believe a teacher over somebody who is a learner? And that kind of thing. And then having the appreciation that you need to be open to the explanation, open to what you're seeing with your eyes, what you're hearing with your ears, and not close yourself off. But when it comes to these conspiracy theories about globalism or Bill Gates, George Soros, usually it centers around some form of anti-Semitism. It's usually a Jewish person that is being attacked in these conspiracy theories, and so you want to maybe go from that angle of why would Bill Gates want to depopulate the earth when he's all about making money and selling things to people? From my understanding, less people means less people to pay for things. And so why kind of find the ways in which these conspiracy theories would eat themselves if they were to be true, and just take the conversation from there. One thing that I always tell people is try not to be too confrontational. That whole agree to disagree thing. There's a limit to what you can try to convince somebody of, and when you hit that limit, recognize it, walk away. It's not worth the somebody living in your head rent free. And it's very hard for me to do. For me, it's easier said than done. But what I've done just in the 55 minutes that we've been here, I blocked 5 people on Twitter who are already telling me how I'm a sellout and we need to reopen America and I'm part of the conspiracy and everything. And it's just block, man. Just walk away. You focus on the people that matter to you and the people that matter, and try to get them on your side.
And I'll give just. Oh no! Did you want to go, Amory?
Well, I wanted to put a different question to you, but you're welcome to respond to that one if you want as well.
I guess one thing that I just want to echo with Renee's point is that gone are the days of staying up all night because someone's wrong on the internet and just arguing your way through it. People are not doing that, but it's really important that everybody share redundantly good information. Like when I say that truth needs an advocate, I'm serious about sharing things that are timely, local, and relevant, and make sure you do it every day. And it could be, your local radio show has a clip, local TV has a clip, but try to really make sure that people in your network feel well held and feel like you are a credible source of information. But it is very tempting, but also usually not worth your time to try to turn people around. The only thing you can share is credible information and remind them where they can get tested.
Yeah. Another question that came in on Slido that I wanted to put to you, Joan, is someone who asked, it was just reported that Twitter will label Trump's tweets with a fact check. Is this encouraging that misinformation will at least be slowed? So that's the question. I know Facebook is also now tagging some information as misinformation. What do you think? Encouraging?
I I haven't read the Twitter fact check announcement, and I'm grinning as I say that
because we need to fact check that fact check,
actually. Because I got to fact check the fact check, to be honest with you.
I know at least Facebook has said that they are not removing all information, but that their fact checkers are tagging it as potential misinformation. So
potential misinformation.
Is that a good direction to go in, or is that trying to have your First Amendment rights and your fact checking cake too?
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think the reason why we think we can do content moderation fairly is because it happens on closed platforms. But really what Facebook and Twitter, if they're doing this, are entering into is the world of Reddit, who already does tag things. And in that coronavirus subreddit, or COVID-19 subreddit in particular that you referenced earlier, they do an incredibly good job of marking information so you know what you're reading. You know it's an opinion piece, you know it's peer-reviewed research, you know it's an article, right? And I think that we do need a lot more cues on social media about who it is that we're reading, what their posting history is, and also fact checks, I think, are instrumental, especially because we lost all of the gatekeepers that would have kept out some of this harmful, malicious, and dangerous health misinformation in the past. And when we have to think about the First Amendment here, about what being online is, I often tell people, like, to be honest with you, posting on Facebook is like being in a hotel lobby. Like, there are still managers, there are people who are going to kick you out if you start saying things you shouldn't be saying. Like, it's not exactly a public space and it's not exactly a private space. And so people have to be cognizant of the fact that the posting that they're doing, even if it's just among their network, isn't necessarily the freest speech as we could, as we might imagine it.
Yeah. That was fact checked, by the way. Our team is on it. An AP News report. In a first, Twitter adds fact check warnings to Trump's tweets. So
it's from an hour ago, and it appears to be about voting related comments that the president.
My question is, what is potential misinformation? It's either misinformation or it's information, right? Now we're adding a third category of potential misinformation. I don't know. That seems kind of
we'll get back to you on that. It sounds like.
To be honest with you, like, and just to hit pause on the COVID-19 discussion, election misinformation is going to change the outcomes in immeasurable ways, especially as we know that opportunities for misinformation are now about which polling places are open or closed. Can you mail in your ballot? What do you need to mail in your ballot? In my darkest of fears about what's going to go on in November 2020 is not an online disinformation campaign, but it's someone who figures out how to make a really good looking mock vote-in mail-in ballot that goes to a PO box to nowhere, right? And we are open to all new kinds of vulnerabilities in this moment. And so I'm glad that Twitter is taking some precaution, knowing that we're going to need it in the next few months. I mean, we're going to see a lot of weird stuff.
It sounds like the takeaways here, if I can try to summarize them, are do some of your own deeper research beyond the things that you are finding. Ask for help with that from someone who seems to know more and is within your network who you trust. Be that trusted person for other people in your network if you can, and just try to amplify information that you truly believe is good and fact-checked and from local trusted news sources. Which I don't know. That's what I'm hearing. Does that sound like good guidance going forward for folks?
Yeah, it's like the skipper used to say, trust but verify. So be a little more skeptical of the things that you hear. There's a difference between being cynical and not believing anything and being skeptical. And so, just be skeptical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the point about posting things that are timely, local, relevant, and redundant is imperative now, because people are looking to their neighbors. They are looking to their trusted relatives. They are looking, I'm sure everyone who's got a doctor in the family has overloaded that poor person with questions, and then the last thing I want to say is that we worry a lot about misinformation because we worry about it reaching people who are authentically looking for answers. And right in this moment, if you search for and need to know what are the symptoms of COVID-19, where can I get tested, and how do I do it? Those 3 questions are so important that people have everybody in their networks circulating that information time and time again, because otherwise the other side is going to win. Like, the misinformation is going to overload the system. And so people do need to participate in this arena quite a bit until such time that platform companies really do clean it up.
Fingers crossed.
Well, I think we could talk about this for the rest of the night, but we'll have to leave it there for now. Huge thank you to Dr. Joan Donovan, Dr. Rene Najera. Thank you so much for being here with us to have this conversation tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
And thanks for all the folks who watched and submitted questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone, but it was really great to get listener questions. There were fewer questions in there, and thanks to the team at WBUR CitySpace for putting this all together. So.
Yeah, you can join them next Tuesday at 6 p.m. for the next town hall, which is all about the psychological toll that COVID-19 is having on all of us. Here and Now senior editor Peter O'Dowd will be in conversation with Dr. Paul Summergrad, the psychiatrist in chief at Tufts Medical Center, Dr. Michelle Durham, assistant professor of psychiatry at Boston University School of Medicine, and author Maura Ahrens-Mealy. And you can register for that at wbur.org/events. And if you want to hear that series that Joan and Rene were a part of last year from Endless Thread, it's called Infectious, and you can subscribe to Endless Thread wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll hear a new 5-part series that we just released called Madness. So thank you for joining us for this. We hope you'll join us for the rest of the town halls, and have a good night.